how well it can be adopted for use by other countries, other communities, and so on. The way I have planned for this session is that we will first have presentation from Mr. Hans Roy on climate and security, Government of Norway. That will be the theme setting presentation. And thereafter, I'll be requesting all the panelists basically to speak on what their understanding is for partnerships and synergetic action. And thereafter, I'll be asking some specific questions. And I request all the participants, whatever question you have to the panel, please put it in the chat box. We'll like to take it in the end. So I hope it's all right with all. So let me first invite Mr. Hans Olive Obeck. I hope, Hans, you are there.
I'm here. I'm ready to go. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Hans Olav Ibrek, Special Envoy on Climate and Security from the Norwegian Ministry of Environment, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Sorry, it's early in the morning here. So it's a great pleasure for me to give this keynote statement, providing some global perspectives for climate and security. As we all know, today, no nation can find lasting security without addressing the climate crisis. The risks that climate change impacts pose to international peace and security are real and present. While climate change is rarely, if ever, the root cause of conflicts, its cascading effects make it a systemic security risk issue. All countries and institutions will increasingly be forced to respond to the security impacts of climate change. Our global stability, human development, and prosperity depend on our collective response to addressing climate change. And of course, it also depends on our ability to make our climate action conflict sensitive and our peace-building efforts climate sensitive. But let me initially underscore that achieving the Paris targets are, of course, our first line of defense. So we all have to step up our ambitions and deliver on the Paris targets. Climate change is a growing priority for governments and communities around the world. The UN Secretary General has called it the defining issue of our time. And we already see impacts of climate change all around the world in terms of increased temperatures, sea level rise, and increased number of extreme weather events. Storms, droughts, floods, wildfires, and now, as we face in Europe, heat waves are becoming more frequent and severe. And these changes have impacts beyond the environmental realm and deeply affect human security as climate change converges with other global pressures. We also see that than most scientific models have predicted. In the Arctic, for instance, we already see 3 to 4 degrees warming and even higher in some parts of the Arctic. So the impacts of climate change are not evenly distributed. It affects disproportionately the poorest and most vulnerable populations. It intersects with environmental degradation to create new vulnerabilities and increasing existing risks to economic prosperity, political stability, military readiness, food, water, health, and energy security. In already fragile contexts, especially where coping capacities tend to be low, those interactions can identify and intensify security challenges. In the worst case, climate changes can overwhelm states and societies, increasing the risk of violence, instability, and conflict. Climate change has often been labeled as a threat multiplier, and increasingly the term threat is being replaced with risks, and the most widely used term now is climate-related security risk. We all know there are no hard security solutions to climate change, so therefore we prefer the focus on risks rather than focusing on threat. The latest IPCC report contains important findings on the links between climate change and conflict, and they underline and confirm important lessons that have emerged from recent research. Climate change does contribute to increased conflict, but along indirect pathways and via intermediate factors such as governance. And there are a variety of context factors, in particular socioeconomic conditions, governance, and political factors that interact and play a key role in translating climate change into conflict risk. I think it's important to address this issue because following the report publication, some political actors have, at least in my view, oversimplified and downplayed this evidence in the IPCC report, implying that peace-building policy should not be concerned with climate change. And we see this now playing out, for instance, in the UN Security Council, where Norway now is a non-permanent member. And we see India, Brazil, Russia, and China are now attacking climate language in all discussions on resolutions. And they basically try to reverse everything we have achieved on this file in the Council so far. So let me therefore emphasize the following. First, while the IPCC report underlines the prime importance of socioeconomic conditions and governance in driving conflict risk, it simultaneously shows that these conditions themselves are subject to climate change. Fragile contexts in which socioeconomic and governance challenges are most pronounced and protected are often facing disproportionate climate change impacts, which further exacerbate pre-existing vulnerabilities. Just as climate change adaptation and mitigation measures should not ignore conflict risk, peace-building efforts cannot and should not ignore the effects of climate change on key drivers of conflict. Second, the IPCC report further finds that climate change adaptation and mitigation have great potential to serve as peace-building measures. It can facilitate dialogue and cooperation between conflicting parties towards a common goal. Risk of conflict can also be reduced by promoting climate-sensitive economic activities along with women's self-determination, for example. A contrast between climate adaptation as a means of promoting either peace or sustainable development, as some have made following the publication of the IPCC report, is therefore not only misleading, but often spurious. The complexity of interactions between climate change and fragility must not be an excuse for inaction, and let me underscore that the extent to which there is a general causal relationship between climate change and conflict, and that's not the critical question to which policymakers need an answer before engaging. Equipped with a context-specific understanding of how climate change and societal factors interact to increase conflict risk, policymakers should neither postpone nor prevent action to support those vulnerable members of our global community that face the compounded risk of climate change. In my view, the critical shortfall lies not in our knowledge, but rather in our action to address this known security challenge. Our capacities to assess and address climate-related security risks are not keeping pace with the speed with which the risk landscape is changing. For policymakers and operational actors, the key question to ask is no longer whether, but rather how climate change interacts with conflict dynamics and how to consider and mitigate potential and emerging security risks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hans. And I must also acknowledge the help that India is getting from Norway. Norwegian Embassy is very active in India and Mission Innovation Norway. So they are working with a number of organizations in India to work on issues related to climate change. And that is one step, or what we are talking of partnerships and synergetic action. So I must say that the recent developments are more in this direction, and the general recognition that we only have one planet to live in, which perhaps we recognized earlier also, but more after COVID, because it has shown us whatever happens in one part of the globe is going to impact other countries as well. So no one will remain untouched, whether it is emissions, pollution, whatever. So therefore, the action also has to be collective. Thank you so much, Hans. Let me now move to Todd. What are your impressions about this? How should we be working more closely and develop partnerships so that we have a better planet to live in?
Right. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So I work in a very specific subject area, which is transportation and urban planning. And the research I do looks at how to make connections between different interest groups. So what we know is that automobile transportation, so people driving for transportation, requires much more cost, so an order of magnitude higher cost to the user, and it requires far more expensive infrastructure. You need more roads and parking facilities. And it imposes much more environmental impacts and health impacts and accident risks, and has negative impacts on your local livability, on the quality of your neighborhood. So we can identify what I call win-win transportation, which are planning strategies that result in people driving less and relying more on walking and bicycling and public transit, which are much more resource efficient. And what I find is that if you promote these just for climate action, you get a little bit of support. But if you identify the co-benefits, the additional benefits, the health benefits, the consumer savings, the social equity benefits, because you're improving mobility for non-drivers, you're reducing accident risk, you're reducing pavement, all of those provide additional benefits that other organizations or other interests will motivate other organizations to support. And so I believe that by identifying the right strategies, the win-win transportation and urban planning strategies, we can build a broad coalition. So you have environmentalists, and you have public health professionals, and you have people concerned about social equity and economic opportunity for poor people, and you have local transportation professionals who are interested in reducing traffic congestion and parking problems. All of these organizations can support the policy reforms that create a more efficient transportation system and a more livable city. So I believe that my research identifies ways to build these kind of multi-stakeholder coalitions based on win-win solutions. I put in the chat box some links to some of my research on this, and I'd be glad to hear your thinking about how we can build coalitions that get beyond just environmentalists and beyond just health professionals and beyond just local transportation professionals, and put all of those together to build more efficient cities.
Sure, thank you so much. And in fact, in this particular discussion, we can also look at the role of electric vehicles, and over a period of time, what role hydrogen can play in the mobility sector as well. Because you are absolutely right that walking is very good, and cycling, bicycling and walking and other methods, but also let's look at the distances because they are very large. So maybe public transport will also have to.
Right,
Yeah.
That's an interesting point, but that's where I think we need to develop more sophisticated analysis.
Sure.
Because if people drive an electric car, you're not reducing traffic congestion, and you're not
Sure.
reducing parking costs, and you're not reducing roadway costs, and you're not reducing accident risk, and you're not improving mobility for non-drivers. Most transportation emission reduction plans rely primarily on changing to electric cars. And there are huge subsidies to change the type of vehicles we drive. What my research shows is that that provides very small benefits. It only reduces emissions. And it doesn't totally reduce emissions because the electricity is generated in ways that produce pollution. But if we can create cities where people don't have to own as many cars, and
Sure.
they don't have to drive as much, and they rely more on walking and bicycling and electric bicycles, you're reducing all of those costs. And so there's a very important message to climate action advocates, and that is simply changing the type of car people drive provides far smaller benefits than reducing the amount of driving people engage in.
Yeah, thank you. My apologies, I haven't introduced Todd. Todd Littman is Executive Director at Victoria Transport Policy Institute. So let's now move to Anna. Anna Rovsar, she's head of partnerships, Renewable Energy Solutions for Africa Foundation. So Anna, over to you.
No, thank you very much, Viva, and let me allow me to say I'm very sad not to be in Tokyo right now with all of you, but a huge thanks to you and DESA, UN Climate Change, and everyone here present, including my fellow panelists, for the invitation for us to be a part here. I think this is a most timely discussion. We have a lot to talk about and agree with on a normal basis already. That's the case every year, but I think this year is particularly special and pressing in the sense that much is coming together, putting emphasis on all these points that we're discussing. I'm coming at this angle, I'll start the way Todd did. I'm coming at this angle from a foundation that is a member-driven platform that tries to, really has one main aim, and it's to create an enabling environment for clean energy investments in African countries, so across the African continent in that sense. And the way that we do that is that we have many members that really come from across the value chain. So it's mostly private sector, but we also have, let's say, contributing actors to that, from academia to NGOs to all other types of players. And we try to gather a bit of a perspective on what is necessary for the need of investment, which we all know is a big elephant in this room, to flow to where it needs to go in order to see what it is that we want to happen in the next decades. And these are obviously very much aligned with the Paris Agreement goals and the SDGs by 2030, which is, again, our common point that we're discussing here. How can we work together in order to achieve and accelerate achieving those two goals? And what that means is this, I want to emphasize the idea of enabling environments, because an enabling environment to achieve, let's say, to scale up some investments in the area that we want to see, really is a matter of getting the right people in the room to understand what it is, the challenges are that they're facing, in order to put a common picture, a bigger picture together. And this is absolutely key, because that requires partnerships in of itself. It means that we are all sort of in the business, if I can say it, of partnerships, to be able to do what it is that we want to do, to be able to really accelerate progress towards the goals that we want to achieve. And the way we do that, and I think that that's somewhat of a way of creating partnerships, that we want to make sure that there is a continuous connection with local stakeholders. Local stakeholders, and by that I mean is, when we look at countries, when we look at regions, when we look at cities, when we look at the variety of players that make up a market, that make up, let's say, an area where we want to see this investment take up, is to really be in continuous contact and continuous collaboration with them, so that we have a sort of reality check of what is living, what is being seen on the ground. These things, the challenges one might face that we're trying to overcome, are very much also a product of their time, in the sense that they evolve. Narratives evolve about what is the next solution that comes to mind, what is the mood in terms of what people are facing on the ground, how are people outside of, I'm sitting in Brussels right now, but how are people in Senegal, how is Egypt, how is Somalia, how is South Africa really seeing these challenges on the ground, so that there can be a realistic discussion as well on what comes next and how everyone views this. So I think that that's one angle of the partnerships part that Rest for Africa Foundation cares about very, very much, coming together with these members that we have in that sense. I'll stop here to you. Back to you, Viva.
Thank you, Anna. The important points you made, one is the enabling environment, and the other is that it is not plug and play. It is something like you have to involve the stakeholders to understand what they require and let them be important partner in fine-tuning the technology and then their adaptation. And it also requires, to some extent, skilling of people. And we'll come back to that point a little later. Thank you so much for your comments. I'll now come to Doris. She's energy analyst at Energy Commission of Ghana. So Doris, what are your impressions?
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to you and Dessa for convening this, because it is in forums like these that we are able to establish partnerships that take us beyond what we are supposed to do. This morning, what we spoke about brought to light a couple of things that I would like to bring to bear here. The fact that less than 2% of funding and investments go to places like Africa for renewable energy, for instance. But it is without us coming together, synergetically, we can't be able to make any move that is really huge for that matter. I work with the Energy Commission of Ghana. We lead most of the renewable energy activities in the country. I don't know if Anna has worked with us, but we do most of the renewable energy and energy efficiency activities in the country. And as a result of that, most of the work we do and most of the results we achieve come on the back of partnerships. I would touch on 3 levels of partnership here. Partnership on the local level, on the national level, and on the international sphere. When you take the city level partnerships, a partnership between C40, Climate C40, and the Accra Metropolitan Assembly was able to produce a climate action plan for the city. This is a city level partnership that would feed into a national level policy. On governmental levels like the Energy Commission, we work hand in hand with the UNDP, for instance, that promote energy efficiency activities within the country. Out of that, almost 1.5 million efficient bulbs are in circulation, and almost 500,000 worth of efficient fridges are in circulation. This reduces the consumption and helps in the demand side management of what we use. I want to throw light on this because these things happen because of the partnerships that are being able to come out of conferences like this. If we don't partner with each other, I doubt we can have the kind of action we want to have by 2030. We have 8 years to 2030. And in the midst of that, we have crisis, which we can't stop. There will be wars, which we can't stop. There are going to be issues along the way, which we can't stop. To be able to achieve what we need to achieve, I believe the partnership is the only way that we can go. But where the partnerships need to go, it has to be win-win. And on the back of Article 6 of at least the Paris Agreement, I would say that now people were able to come up with partnerships that benefit another party whilst benefiting whoever they are trying to help. I will talk of the recent Swiss agreement with Ghana. Now Sweden comes in to have a partnership with Ghana in providing the support for what happens in the climate context in the country. What happens is that Sweden gets the benefits as well on their part. And these are the kind of bilateral partnerships that could happen between each country. It could be between Norway and India, as you've mentioned. It could be between other countries, as you've mentioned. Yes, there is the drive towards electric mobility now. And I just want to quickly touch on that with Todd. Todd, yes, it's great for us to go back to cycling, using the resources the way it is, but without the systems, without the infrastructure, cycling kills more people than you can actually imagine. When you come to some places where there are no cycle lanes and you are sharing the road, cycling on the main road, I cycle on the main road with cars, it is the most dangerous thing because every 2 seconds you're looking back, you're making sure that you can arrive home safely. So these actually also require systems that need to be planned from city level all the way up. And that equally takes investments that require partnership on another level. It works now with electric mobility because yes, there are already roads that accommodate internal combustion engine vehicles. So if you're just going to be able to reduce emissions by promoting electric mobility, that also adds up to it. But even on that angle, we have a different level of partnership brewing, because whereas some international partners would want to partner to promote electric mobility, there are some international partners that rather want to come to Africa to promote ICE vehicles, to promote internal combustion engine. So I ask, is the partnership in reverse, or is the partnership going to move us forward? Because if we have to do some synergetic work here, then moving forward has to be more important than moving backwards. And that has to be contextualized. Coming back to the country, looking at the context from which you're dealing with on the country, and being able to strategize for it to be a win-win situation, because that is the only way that we can come up with a synergetic action when we require to be partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doris. And you made very valid points. In fact, in India also, rather, we are afraid of driving two-wheelers or cycle because of the traffic on the roads. So definitely that requires a different mindset, and we need to have separate lanes for the cyclist, which is in many countries. And surely one can look into what should be the future path. And as I said earlier, it will also depend on what the other developments are. And the way it impacts, like when we talk of green shipping, and the players in India, they are becoming very serious about this initiative, then we are talking of waterways as a whole. And the ship will carry things from one country to the other, and it's very important to have the right kind of technologies. The other point I would like to make here is that partnerships, and of course today we are living in this age of intellectual property and getting benefits from the technology we have developed. And somewhere it is also that countries, the large players, large corporates in different countries, they are going for cleaner technologies. But when I talk of partnerships, it is that those technologies should also reach to small and medium enterprises, which encompass large part of manufacturing in countries like, in most countries in Asia and Africa. So there also, what kind of partnerships, what kind of finances one can provide, because I take it that as global citizens, it's responsibility that we also take care of other parts, not just our country, but other countries as well, because ultimately whatever will happen in those countries is going to have global impact. So I'd like now to invite Christine He. She's Deputy Secretary General, Global Forum on Human Settlements. So over to you.
Thank you.
Christine.
Thank you. Thank you, Reba. Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I'd like to respond a little bit to partnership Doris has mentioned, because I have been working on partnership, especially at the city level for more than 10 years. I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Global Forum on Human Settlements, so we have been working on cities, or connecting cities in uniting to combat the climate change for 17 years. Apparently, the areas that have the strongest link between SDGs and the Paris Agreement are water, energy, and environment. But there's no denying that cities are a key arena where we can create most of the synergies and deliver most of the goals. However, challenges cities are facing are huge and unlikely to be dealt with without collaboration vertically and horizontally. We have so many talks on partnership, different kinds of partnership at different levels. But unfortunately, from our observation and experience with cities and with city governments, the implementation and the outcomes are far from enough to help achieve the targets and goals. I think there are three key areas that we have to tackle to build up synergies, especially at the city level, at the local level. Number one, I think this absence of key stakeholders. For example, the communities and the disadvantaged groups are always excluded from the decision-making process due to their low representation and other reasons. So they have no voice in most cases. So big decisions are taken without the voice and participation of those who are affected the most. Many evidence has constantly shown that this leads to inefficient use of resources and unequal allocation of capital, institutional capacity, as well as financial resources. So in those cases, that was the situation. And also some keywords or preconditions for the win-win partnership to be materialized. The partnership has to be equal partnership that we have been advocating for, and lasting partnership, and also sustaining an effective partnership. And second one is, I think at the city, at the local level, there's a huge lack of integrated approach. City is a complex system. We have to adopt the integrated or comprehensive approach to deal with every sector and then combine them together. And number three, there's the lack of institutional authority and the capability. And the last one is that also part of the work I've been doing research on is lifetime accountability for officials to ensure we have the policy coherence and also policy integration. Yes, I think that's the some words from me. I think we'll have just go more specific into the questions we'll follow later.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you raised very important points. In fact, in India also, when we are talking of states like the newly carved state of Ladakh, so right from day one, they had set the ambition that it will be net zero. And therefore, what kind of construction should go on, what kind of urban planning should be done. So that is what has started happening. But you're absolutely right. We have to look into the entire life cycle analysis of whichever technology we introduce. So whether it is electric vehicles, whether it is solar. So ultimately, what are we going to do with the used panels and so on? So policy should take care of all these little things which we are going to face in the future, whether how do you discard the battery, so that R&D should also go on. And of course, it is that different players, they need to talk to each other and understand what impact it's going to have, say, on waste generation and how can we enter more into a circular economy. So thank you very much for it. Now I'll come to Perisa Claus. She's Executive Director, Resilient Urban Planning and Development. Over to you, Perisa.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I would like to, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this session. I would like to see actually a partnership from different points of view, from actually private sector point of view. And we are using actually partnership to let's say we have several ways that we cooperate with our especially international partners on climate and SDGs. So we support our partner cities to work towards limiting the Earth's temperature increase to under 1 degree centigrade by tackling urban heat islands. So we are concentrating on urban heat island phenomena. And at the moment, we concentrate also on optimization of climatic performance of urban areas, especially high-risk areas, by integrating nature-based solutions or other strategies to cool down the city. We actually also help our partner cities to overcome their obstacles that they are facing on implementing their climate action plans on the ground. So I will concentrate on that because our partners, some of our partner cities, actually, they have a climate action plan on their hands, but they're facing with some obstacles to implement it on the ground. So in this case, we are trying to facilitate, especially North-South cooperation to actually overcome some of the obstacles like financial sources or lack of financial sources, lack of technology, lack of knowledge and skills, as well as institutional barriers. So we are mostly focusing on this points through strengthening our partnership. And of course, we know that this global agendas or 2030 agenda and also the Paris Agreement cannot be realized through the strong commitment to partnership and cooperation at all levels. So we are using different also platforms to bring our partners around the tables, like for example, True World Urban Campaign. It's an initiative of UN Habitat. We are organizing several urban thinkers to bring us several stakeholders from governmental organizations to local communities around the table to discuss not only challenges, obstacles, barriers, also showcasing the best practices and try to get the commitments from the city and then overcome and try to help them to empower them to overcome their obstacles and they can implement their climate action plans on the ground. So basically, we are trying to facilitate this north-south and also triangular cooperation, which can help the countries to increase mitigation and adaptation, technology transfer, capacity building, finance, as well as enhancing policy and institutional coherence. That's already the panelists already mentioned. I would like to also wrap it in four main categories. I mean, through the partnership, we can we can help the countries to actually transfer the technology and also learn from each other, not only from their successful factors, but also from the failures. This is also important. We have to pay attention. And also, as Anna said, working in a very inclusive manner and trying to engage the local communities and making a kind of a knowledge dialogue and co-creating, trying to help us to achieve the innovative measures. And as well as aligning with each other, which Christine already mentioned it, and trying to also come out of the silo mentality and bring the different partners together, and also make a correlation, and already Todd mentioned it, as well as also allocating a sufficient budget, trying to address climate change, and also putting it as a priority to take action.
Thank you, Parisa. And you really spelled out very correctly that on one end, we need the technology, we need sharing of technology, but also to adopt that technology, we need finances, because every country would like to go green as much as possible, but then affordability also becomes an issue, and tech transfer and absorption of technology also remains an issue. So that brings me to the next point, and that is that while most of the countries, they do have climate action plans, but many of them are falling behind. So it's open to all the panelists, what your comments are, how your countries are doing, and what do you feel we can do better? So anyone can answer, or Doris, can I start with you?
Sure, you can. Basically, I think every country is putting together a climate action plan, because first of all, without a plan, we don't know where you're going. Contextually, you have to look at the timelines being different for each country. That has to be understood, that no country would achieve the targets in the same time space. We would all have a goal, but we would have to achieve it at different time space. That was established long ago, and we have to be able to do that in the face of it being just, equitable, and a fair transition for every country. And it's in the context of that that you see a lot of countries putting together their climate action plans. Some climate action plans, of course, are very ambitious, and maybe we don't look at the context from which the country stand. No country would achieve the climate change goals, their net zero emissions, at the same time. Why? Because every country has a different context. But I think when we are putting together the climate action plan, what happens is that we either have people come in and try to help you, the country, to put together an action plan, which is the case we see most of the time. And most of the time, these people may not have understanding of issues on the ground as it is. As Christine tried to point out, sometimes to go on the ground, see what is really happening and be able to use that helps you to actually modify your climate action plan and where you want to get it to. But because we don't go on the ground to find out what exactly is the context in this village, in this city, what is happening here, how can I tailor what is happening here in this context so that it gets a plan that transitions from where they are to where they could be in the next couple of years. We set the goals for them without understanding the context sometimes. And maybe as we're dealing with the top level people or the people that you'll be working with, not going onto the ground means that they equally agree with you, because some of these action plans come on the back of funding. And if somebody comes to you with funding to actually get you to do a climate action plan, you would have to tailor it the way the person wants it to be tailored. But can that be implemented? I think what we need to do is, when climate action plans are drawn for countries, we should, on the back of that, draw the strategic implementation plan for each of these action plans. So when we have a broader action plan for the country or for the locality that we are finding ourselves in, then we draw implementation plans and how the timeline should be in achieving this. It is during this implementation phases and understanding and speaking to the people that will understand that, okay, although we are saying they should put this target at 2030, based on what they have here, they may actually achieve this by 2040. Or by 2030, they may be doing half of it, or they may be doing a quarter of it. Can we be realistic and see what this is? Yes, I think the ambitious goals are very important because they set up on our toes. We get to be working and try to meet a demand. But I think when we're setting the ambitious plans and the climate action, we have to come along with implementation plans. And it's these implementation plans that will point to the holes in these action plans that we are putting together.
Yeah, I see Hans, you have a question?
I just
Hans,
wanted,
and yeah.
yeah, I just
you
wanted to add a few reflections based on your question. And of course, you're asking what all countries can do, and also in terms of partnerships. Just a small caveat up front in terms of our joint efforts these days. Of course, we are all now being increasingly impacted by the Ukraine crisis, and also this is coming on top of the COVID-19 crisis. So it's a little bit uncertain where we are heading globally these days. But of course, in terms of what all countries can do, we have the SDG and the Paris Agreement, and so we have the targets, and now we need to deliver. And I think the main emphasis going forward, building on the last remarks, is of course implementation. I think we have the targets. Now we need to roll up our sleeves and get going in terms of enhancing our ambitions. And when you look at the Paris Agreement, we are all asked to enhance our ambitions, to submit our nationally determined contributions, and we have a common responsibility to reach the Paris Agreement. And I would like to highlight the Paris Agreement has actually 3 key targets on mitigation, adaptation, and finance. In terms of what we are doing from the Norwegian side, of course, we have ambitious mitigation plans, reduce emissions by 50 to 55% by 2030. Adaptation is a key priority now in our development cooperation policy. And in terms of finance, we have actually committed to double climate finance by 2026 and triple adaptation support. And of course, this is on top of the 1% of our GDP to ODA. So we are delivering. And let me just finally add 2 key issues where I think we need to have more emphasis, and that is, of course, on the energy transition. Reducing emissions from the way we use energy will, of course, be key. Phasing out coal is the most urgent thing we need to get going. And then building on this, I think it's so easy for us to focus on the long-term goals, but I would like to switch the debate now towards the more short-term goals, because what we will achieve by 2030 will to a large extent decide how we will perform on the 2050 targets. It's so easy for all of us to talk about 2050 and the long-term targets, but most of us will not be around, or at least not be in a position to take action by 2050. So that's why I would like to switch the debate on focusing more on the shorter term targets instead of only focusing on the long term net zero target by 2050, 60 or 70. We need to make sure that we are delivering on our 2030 targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anna? Anna?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. Yes, I mean, I think this is really getting into the crux of the issue. I very much like Hans's point about sort of the long-term versus the short-term targets. The good thing is that we do have a common idea of where we want to go. So if we keep our eyes on the ball, in the sense, long-term, I think we have a common understanding of where this takes us, right? Globally speaking, and also in terms of partnerships. And at least that gives us a common language, a common framework on what it is that we're discussing about, which is very important when we do have so many moving pieces in this big puzzle. What's challenging about that situation is not only is that a challenge in itself, but we are challenged on the road to that every day. We're sort of going through a crisis on top of a crisis right now. Much is still unfolding in ways on how some of the impacts of what we've been feeling in the past 2 years and what has been going on this year will how that will play out. But in that sense, COVID has somehow, I think, reinvigorated a bit the sense and the role, the importance of international cooperation, of international organizations, of multilateral sort of collaboration in that sense, which is a good thing. It's something that was not so obvious anymore in recent years. And I think that while much of the national responses, of course, were at the order of the day, there was a need and there was a clear happening of many countries interacting, international organizations trying to sort of wrap their heads around, and you could go towards that for guidance in a sense. And that was something that helps us as we're heading to the next crisis, right? So if last year was really put health on top of the agenda, showing us just how important that is, a very basic but very primordial building stone of how our societies work around the world, then this year really has put the emphasis on how energy is absolutely vital in terms of how we go about our daily lives, whether it's at the micro, meso, or meta level in that sense. So this is still very much playing out, but I think that the way of reviving international collaboration around this is really back in the spotlight. And in that sense, even though this casts a bit of a dark shadow that we kind of all probably experience at this point on how to go about this next, since that so many things can still play out, if the focus remains on where we need to go, maintaining it the way we did throughout COVID, maintaining it how we'll navigate our way outside of this energy crisis, I mean, we can again go towards this framework and this common language. And I think that looking at countries specifically, I mean, I very much like what Doris said, sticking towards plans that can be made bottom up, as much is being decided, let's say, top down, and really developing holistic plans, right? Our realization the past 10 years, let's say, we were not having the same discussions 10 years ago, and that's a good thing, where today we realize that, climate, sustainable development, these objectives are compatible. They actually do feed into each other. And so organizing and thinking strategically in ways that combine those is now something that is much more straightforward, or at least in the minds of policymakers than it was 10 years ago. That in of itself is an element of progress. So linking, let's say, climate plans with energy sector plans, with industrialization policies, with all elements of development, because again, I'm coming at this from the angle of African countries. That's where that's where Rest of Africa Foundation works at. But there are many important areas of decarbonization versus development. Can they be compatible in a way that makes sense for these countries? I think all of that is definitely a way ahead. But the interlinkages between those are those to be really pointed down, put down on paper, and then developed into these strategic implementation plans that Doris mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. In fact, if we go 2 decades before, it was difficult to convince that climate change is a threat. And now everyone knows it is a reality. And it's also understanding of that sustainable development and climate change. They are part of the same coin, because unless and until you move towards sustainability, you can never fight climate change. One thing which this Ukraine war has also shown us that energy security at the regional level also becomes extremely important. And the other, which is not discussed at all, is regarding the food security, because this an unfortunate incidents is also threatening the food security in the world. It is both in terms of the direct food production this year and perhaps next year also, because it's impacting the fertilizer exports from Ukraine. So that is another thing, and we are moving towards that population. Unfortunately, it's rising, and more for the countries which are already food stressed. So their agriculture has to develop, and it has to be sustainable. We cannot depend on urea the way we have done in the past, or the agriculture practices which were followed. So let's also look into how these countries should also attain food security in addition to nutritional security as well as energy security. And no grain should go waste. So it's also that food wastage, which is also contributing to the climate change. We need to take care of that. So I'll first come to Todd. Todd, you had raised your hand, so let's first discuss these issues and then move to the next question.
Yes, well, I want to respectfully disagree with some of the comments, because there's too much focus on technology and too much focus on investments. And I think too much focus on climate-focused solutions, and not enough on structural reforms that achieve these goals, that are not new technologies. They're pricing reforms, or they're land use reforms, or they're housing reforms, or they're transportation planning reforms that change the way people use fuel. For example, many countries, particularly developing countries, subsidize fuel to a huge degree. And most cities devote the majority of their road space to accommodating cars. And very few cities, particularly in India and particularly in Africa, have bus lanes that allow the majority of people who don't own cars, who travel by bus or travel by walking or travel by bicycling, to get around safely. So it doesn't require investments. It requires changing the way we allocate public resources like road space, and the way that countries price fuel, and the way that that cities are designed. Increasingly, cities are designed for cars, to favor automobile transportation, and more development occurs at the urban fringe, where it's difficult for people, particularly low-income people, to reach without owning a car or paying a bus fare. So the solutions aren't, certainly there is a need for investment, and there is a need for international investment, but I think it's a mistake for experts to imply that the action is primarily external investments, rather than changing the way we plan and the policies that we have within countries. So there's a tremendous amount that countries can do on their own without relying on external developing agency investments. And I'd like to see more discussion of that.
Sure. Todd, I'll also discuss with you separately, because in India, we had a terrible experience of setting a separate line for the bus. We'll discuss about it separately.
Sure,
so we
sure.
definitely
Let me point out that
and the other thing is that we are looking.
Indian cities are the slowest to build bus rapid transit lines.
Yeah,
So the World Bank and other developing agencies are emphasizing the efficiency, the social equity and
Sure.
energy efficiency and safety and health benefits of dedicating road space to buses.
sure.
And Africa and Indian cities have been very slow to do this. You see it much more in Latin American countries and in China. China is the world leader. So we need to send a message to
Sure.
India and African policymakers that the solutions, that they have the solutions in their hands. It is not about waiting for the international agencies to give them money.
Sure,
They
sure.
can do it on their own.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I'll first come to
Excuse me,
Christine.
can I add a
Yeah,
point
Christine,
here?
yeah.
Well, absolutely, we need a structural shift or structural change, but there are so many factors affecting a country's climate action. The action plan, the cultural, the social, public view, development stage, political system, economic structure, etc. So all the more that there's no justice in history. So when it comes to climate action, there are huge variations among countries, among regions. So I think everyone is. We have to stop to be idealistic. But all in all, I think political willingness, the vision, the executive capacity play a key role in driving forward the plan, action plans. But the central to this ambition is to be willing to undertake the short-term pain for the long-term gain. So this is the question everyone has to consider. We have delayed global actions for 2 to 3 decades, another decade to lose. So the national governments need to be really serious. And as Hash mentioned, the short-term target here is to write their zero emission, their zero pledges into law. Then we will have the implementation on the ground, which is not easy, but a must do. Another thing is that I think countries have to meticulously design the action plan, which should be integrated into all sectors to avoid overlapping, incoherence, and contradiction in policies, regulations, and actions on the ground. So it is key to put people who are really serious about climate change in power. Then they have the necessary authority and capacity to influence, to coordinate departments, and to push forward the implementation on the ground. So here again, a combination of top-down and bottom-up approach is needed to ensure enforcement of laws and on-the-ground implementation progress. Yeah.
Thank you, Christine, for your very constructive suggestions. Let me come to Hans and then to Doris.
Thank you. I'm not going to go into this heated exchange on how to move forward, but it's I would like to provide a few comments, especially what Anna said. Maybe I will also respectfully disagree with some of the points that she made, building on what Todd just said, because for me, of course, if you look at where we're heading today, we are way behind when it comes to implementing the SDGs. We're way behind when it comes to the Paris Agreement. Emissions are in fact going up, not going down. We have not peaked yet, so we are not doing very well. Anna, you also said that COVID-19 was an example of countries coming together, working together. I think the jury is still out on that one. In my view, that's not the case, because there were some countries getting together and taking actions, but leaving a lot of major parts of the world out, especially part of the world that you are targeting specifically in terms of Africa. So for me, the key worry that I have now is that because of the current situation, multilateralism is under pressure. Global cooperation is definitely under pressure. And the key theme that we are discussing is actually partnerships. But I don't see the partnerships emerging now between governments. It's increasing conflicts. The level of conflicts are going up, not necessarily just armed conflicts, but now we see trade conflicts. We see, especially now, European countries scrambling to find energy suppliers all around the world, of course, with huge consequences for least developed countries. You can take Pakistan that went all in for gas some years ago. No, they cannot afford to buy LNG anymore because Europe is using their buying power to buy up whatever LNG they can find in the world. So there's a lot of stuff going on now. So for me, a key concern that I'm faced with is actually that multilateralism might break up and we are not working together. We can see also the conflict between China and the US now playing out. We don't have the leadership in terms of climate change actions anymore either. So for me now, there is a reason to worry, but of course, the only thing we can do is to focus on what we can help out to and build the necessary partnerships. But we are under tough pressure from all corners of the world these days. So this is going to be an uphill struggle for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Doris?
Thank you so much. I first want to say that every action we would take now, whatever we do now, it's not a one-size-cap-fits-all. There's going to be several things that would happen for something to occur. I believe we shouldn't be a bit idealistic here. We have to look at what is on the ground and tackle what is on the ground, not ideals. First of all, when you come to Africa, Africa is not a country, it's a continent made of several countries, over 50 plus of them. And each country has got specific issues. Each country has needs, context that has to be taken into consideration. You can't know Ghana better than me because Ghana, I can tell you the number of bus lanes in Ghana. You can't tell me there are bus lanes in DRC, Congo. We have to come into the country specifically and see what the problem is. Ideals on the side. Now, those structural performances, funding is required, behavioral change is required. There is a lot required to do one thing. Nobody is saying just funding should come in or just behavioral change should do it. Behavioral change alone won't do it. Funding alone won't do it. Everything comes into context to play one big role. And that is where I come in when I said the implementation plans, when we draw climate action plans and we don't even understand countries. We have to go to those countries, see those countries, understand their context before we make ideas. Now, when you tell somebody in Ghana, oh, buses, build more, there are bus lanes there, and I live in Ghana, I live in Accra, and I can context and disagree with that, then it brings us back to the point that do we understand each other to be partners? For partnership to work, two people need to understand the context of each other. For it to be win-win, two parties need to understand those contexts. One would benefit, the other has to also benefit. That is good governance for partnership, and that has to be put on the ground. And it's on the back of that that I agree when we say on the back of Ukraine and Russia, multilateralism is dying. Because today, a couple of years ago, when Africans were getting gas everywhere and wanted to develop their gas resources, we said gas wasn't green in investment. So there was no investment coming to Africa to develop those gas projects. They've got gas. Yet we talk of clean cooking being a problem, where we can develop these gas for these women to have clean cooking access. No, they didn't have investment. This investment could be win-win, but it wasn't done. Then on the back of Ukraine and Russia, we have European Union redefining green investment to include gas. How are we defining partnerships? It has to be long-term, it has to be consistent. We don't define it as it suits us today and define it when it changes tomorrow because the context changes. Because what will happen on the back of that is we'll kill multilateralism and we'll not be able to have countries working together. And if that doesn't happen, then I don't know how we are going to have synergetic action. It is based on us being able to work together, being able to know that we are not calling one out for the other and looking out for one party on the other. Then where is the just transition? Where is the equitability? Where are we saying there is reason and conscience behind what is being done? I think that we need to come out of the idealism. We need to understand that several factors, not just one, not two, not three, several factors will work to do one. Yes, structural change is needed. At the same time, funding is needed. At the same time, investment is needed. And when I propose funding, just on the back of COP26, funding is not grants. funding is investment, making business case to come into Africa. When you're developing gas resources, you, the partner coming in, will also benefit from that. It's not you bringing money, way begging or holding a bowl and saying, give us money, give us money. No, there are resources. They're sitting on gas resources. They're sitting on resources. Now it benefits European Union. Are we not partnering on that? Now, how does that spell out to Nigeria? Why wouldn't the president of Nigeria not be happy about it? Because then it is double terms. It's like you saying one thing today and tomorrow not saying that thing. Partnerships have to work on the back of multilateralism, and that we need to take into context, and that requires long-term working together with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. We are left with 8 minutes. So quickly, Anna.
Yes, sure. I'll be very quick. Thank you, Hans, for making the point on the global cooperation aspect. You're absolutely right. I think indeed there's been many, let's say, things that can be left for incredible improvement over the past crises that have come out. You're very right to say this. I suppose perhaps what I was meaning to point towards is it became painfully clear just how much global cooperation is necessary with a crisis of such a vigor, that then kind of opened the path towards us understanding just how big the climate challenge then is at a global level. And I think that really brought home the point of just how much cooperation is needed, just how much, of course, things are organized at the national level state, fully agree on this, but just how much this also plays into dependencies, working together, partnerships of a different nature. We're not talking about health, let's say, but also the fact that the crisis, how it advanced, really relied on many partnerships of very different natures taking place across different sectors, across different players, across different regions at that time. But of course, many things were left out there, and I fully agree with you on that point. So thank you for raising that. And with Doris' point, I couldn't agree more. I think that the contextual aspect, especially when it comes to African countries, are extremely important. I say especially because that's where we're focusing on, but I think it is sort of the building block where you have to look at and zoom in on to be able to understand. I think these narratives that I was mentioning in the beginning also play a role, because this is how basically we understand the problem that's at play and how we can frame a solution that also has buy-in, that has ownership, that really is being thought of, and that can be carried forward by a wide group in that sense. And that really just happens at a bottom-up level. I think last point is that what we can observe perhaps, I'm very much cognizant about this idea of multilateralism, whether it's going forward or not. I think what we're seeing is also a bit of a transformation of the actors in the field. We're seeing, governments, of course, public actors being present, a lot of civil society, a lot of stakeholders that are present there as well. There's a bit more of enmeshing as well with private sector, with investors. There's a bit of the playing field is also becoming a bit more crowded, in the sense that it can go in different partnerships in different directions. And I think that is perhaps something that might evolve in the next coming years as we all face these common challenges. But just wanted to raise that, and thank you again for
Thank you, Anna. Perisa?
Yes, I just wanted to mention something here, that there is no doubt that the whole world is actually facing with multiple crises, which made a very complex situation. But let's say, fortunately or unfortunately, sometimes the crisis paved the path to accelerate the transition. For example, the recent war and conflict with Russia has caused some countries, like, for example, Germany, think about not depending on fossil fuel and examine the transition to sustainable energy as soon as possible, which will help such a countries to be independent on energy. And of course, this will definitely increase investment in sustainable energy, and lots of capital will be allocated to sustainable or renewable energy. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you,
Perisa. In fact, my own comments will be that we are not talking of either or. It is that one shoe doesn't fit all. So there are different nations, different regions with different requirements. In fact, when metro was introduced in Delhi, it was something like it's going to reduce traffic on the roads. But by the time metro was ready, perhaps the number of vehicles had increased again. And therefore, it is not that we will go for other modes of transportation. It is that these perhaps will also continue, but how to make them more green. And it is that the infrastructure development is also going to take a long time. So therefore, we are talking of that development in all over the world. It has to continue, it will take place. And therefore, that is where we require the technology. If we are building infrastructure, say when we are talking of infrastructure being built for buildings, why not to use the best method of cooling them? Why not to use the best building material which is sustainably produced? So it's the entire value chain on which we should work on. We should do the life cycle analysis, get best of the technology, and that is what we mean, or the countries which are developing, they require that kind of technology sharing, because otherwise it's going to take them a very long time to develop their own technologies. Not to say that we should forget the technologies which are used today. So it's going to be combination of the two, which will take us towards sustainability, like what kind of local material can be utilized. It's not just importing material from outside. And then when we talk of new technologies, like if we are talking of hydrogen as a fuel for the future energy, for major industries as well as maybe for transportation, then why not to get that technology, what is existing today, create manpower, because it is that the technology needs to be indigenized. It needs to be worked on for use in those countries. Hydrogen till now is used largely for mega industries, but how do we ensure that it can be used by small and medium enterprises? So you require that work, and I'll say that scientists in all over the world, they understand, they are very good, and they can be part and parcel of making this technology more refined for their own use. We need to create green jobs, and that is where it's the role of R&D as well as human resource development will play an important part, and that can also be possible only through partnerships. So one is looking for that whatever technology has been developed, it is not just to make financial gains, it is basically to make this world more livable, and therefore sharing those technologies at global level, modify them further, because it is that nothing is perfect, and we need to develop on those technologies further to make them more cost competitive. And with this, I would like to end this session. I'm sorry I couldn't take the question and answers because we are running out of time. And I'll require all the panelists, for whomsoever the questions are addressed to, please answer them. And I'm sure I can take liberty of requesting the panelists that anyone can get in touch with you and ask you more questions and clarifications. So with these words, I'd like to thank all the panelists, all those who are attending the sessions for your time. And I hope it was useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.